Thank you so much, Annie and Polly, for having us today. And thanks so much for Stanislav for sharing with us this important story and how important for us to witness and to listen and to try to understand and to make sense of what happens in places that maybe we would rarely have a chance to hear these voices, and how important, as you say, to look beyond geographies and to see the many prisons that exist in many countries around the world. I just have to start by saying that I have not experienced imprisonment, or I have never been to an inside prison. But I want to borrow what Polly and Pani has said in the beginning, that prison has many metaphors, and therefore I just want to apologize that I'm not speaking on behalf of any person who experienced torture or prison, or on the families of the disappeared. But rather, I'm going to try to explain to you how, in my opinion, Syria has become a death world, and what it means for the city to be living in the age of brutalism through the lens of my city, Homs, that I was displaced from for 14 years. In Syria, before the war started in 2011, many people have said that walls have ears, and everyone was afraid from everyone, even inside families, even between friends. We would never dare to speak to anybody. And in 1980, when a group of armed men tried to resist and rebel against the government caused a massacre in the early 80s. That this massacre was known as the events, and nobody would dare in my entire life to mention what happened then. But we know that there was a destruction in the city of Hama, that it's around 45 kilometers away from my city, and also hundreds of people were killed and imprisoned. And what we know, that we knew that there are things that we cannot talk about, and we always would say that if you ask about it disappear, you will disappear. And therefore, even the families of the missing people would struggle to really go and ask for and search for the missing people, because they would, if they go and ask in the security branches, they would maybe be arrested themselves as well. Now, when the war started in 2011, I'm an architect. I focus on architecture and I focus on destruction of cities. Architecture has become a tool that was weaponized by the Assad regime. And you can see in this photo that these two buildings that they were called the Gardenia Towers. In my city, they were supposed to be, before the war, a hotel and residential building. They became to be known as the Death Towers. Because it's in these two buildings, the tallest two buildings in the city, the government had put snipers there, and they were overseeing a huge part of Homs. So for 14 years, I was displaced from my city, as Benny said, and I was only able to return this year to Homs in March at the beginning, and then in August I came back this Monday from Syria. So I'm only reflecting a little bit on what does prison mean in the everyday life, and what does the question of disappearing people mean in the everyday life. This is a graffiti that you can still see in some of the buildings inside Syria, and I did read the article that Stanislav wrote about his visit to Syria, and he said that there's a lot of rewriting history inside the country. For instance, we lived in a time when we were seeing that Assad is the holy god, or like a prophet, and here we can see on the graffiti it says Assad, Syria. So they always said forever, forever, Assad forever, which means like it was, the country is their own countries for the Assad government. And the statues, overseeing us everywhere, they become almost like gods for us. I remember as a child when we had a newspaper and had a photo of President Hafez al-Assad. We were so afraid to throw these photos in the rubbish bin. So I remember like cutting these pieces as a child and teenager, and every few months we would collect them and burn them. Like, imagine that we were afraid that somebody would come to our rubbish bags and like search them and see that we throw God in the rubbish bin. And now, even though that the city had been rewritten spatially by removing a lot of the statues and a lot of, the older government flags and the names of Assad, as I see in your article as well, when you documented your entry from Lebanon to Syria. But sometimes entering some of the buildings that they haven't been, let's say, touched yet, you can still see the remains of the kingdom of fear, we can call it. In my city of Homs, over half of the neighborhoods have been destroyed. So as in many cities in Ukraine, like Kharkiv, for instance, you see that people's homes have been destroyed to collectively punish civilians. And of course, we have seen in Syria, in Iraq, in Palestine, in Ukraine, how cultural heritage, people's history and identity is being destroyed. So when I went to Homs, you can really sometimes go to places where there is no horizon except the ruins and the rubble. And you can see in this ruined neighborhood, on the right here, there are some foundations of somebody trying to build something inside the rubble. And you can see here the vehicle who is trying to remove some of the rubble. This is the same site called Karm Zaytoun, and it's one of the heavily and brutally destroyed areas in the city. Of course, one of the many ways that solidarity across Ukraine and Syria happens for many reasons, but also something that, let's say, was in common with the Russia's aggression and Russia's destruction and support of the Assad regime. So I have a lot of conversations with my Ukrainian architecture friends, speak about the questions of what does it mean to rebuild and how can we start again. And what it means to destroy people's identity. Stanislav spoke about, how the prison destroys one's sense of, let's say, dignity and psychologically and physically, but what also means to destroy a community collectively through the destruction of their architecture, but also the killing of their people. Now, why I wanted to show this specific site, Karm Zaytoun, as I told you, and you can see here the construction site, because when I was in Syria, reports have emerged that when one person started to rebuild this building, they found a woman, a man, and a child below the rubble, and they were handcuffed and blindfolded for over 10 years. And for me, I wanted to highlight that even though it has been told that 500,000 people have been killed in Syria in the last 14 years, out of a population of 20 million, the number is incorrect, and even the UN agencies have stopped counting the dead and the killed because they could no longer verify and reach to places where it had been reported that people were killed. And even though there are sites that they are remaining inside our city, like this site, we don't know what's still under the ground, and many people are still looking for thousands of missing people until today, because there is no record of their fate, and there is no place for their grave or their bodies. And this is the big surge inside Syria at the moment on the fate of the disappeared persons. During my time in Homs, I was working on a film, and I started interviewing some of the residents who, as like Hani said, we don't want to enter a faceless war. Like when we hear about the war in Ukraine or the war in Syria, sometimes it becomes like an abstract war and a faceless war. And I wanted to interview people who have been impacted. So I interviewed Samira, for instance, who is an artist and a teacher, an art teacher, who has her home destroyed, and she was collecting inside the ruins some of the remains of what she found in her life. And she told me they were the enemy of our culture, in reference to the Assad regime and its allies. In other sites, the city had become almost like a site of trauma and grief and mourning. This was the first time I went to the cemetery, and this is one of the oldest, or like one of the most remarkable mosques in the city. You can see here in the graves numbers of people. So, for instance, there are some stones that show in Arabic the number 10 or 16 or 17 or 14. because it has never been identified whose bodies were here. And that was for many reasons, because sometimes when the attacks happened on Syria, people would just bury the dead. And in other situations, it was also a way to save the dead people, because sometimes the government, what happened inside the years of the war, they returned to attack even the dead bodies if that person was, let's say, wanted as an activist or a political, or a rebel or something. So there were cases where they went to destroy even the cemeteries. As I said, the thinking about the people who were killed and disappeared has become part of our plight for our future, and the plight for transitional justice in Syria. And I wanted to put this example where somebody has been trying to remember and to help us think about the disappeared in space. You can see in this picture a group of people that gather together to plant a tree. So there's on the right of this tower, there's like a very small branch, like higher than the tree here. And this initiative was called the fig trees, like in reference to a fig tree that was found inside the ruin. And what does this author and activist and novelist Jaber Bekir has been doing in this project called the fig trees is to call the families of the disappeared and ask them if they are willing to plant a tree in the name of the persons that they lost. So here in this photo, he is digging the ground to plant the tree, and you can see on the right a mother who wrote the name of her son, who is coming here together with the man to put the name of her killed son there. She actually told us she has lost the three of her boys and two of her siblings. And as we were doing this activity together with architecture students at the University of Damascus, we had another woman coming to us, and she said she was asking us what you were doing. So explained the project, and she said, I lost my son too. So Jabir, the founder of this initiative, because he felt so sad about her and she was standing there, he said, do you want to also write the name of your son? So on this wooden piece on the right, we eventually asked each mother to write the name of her son, and they put it there. And for us, when I spoke to Jabir, he told me how important this is to remember in space, not to remember the missing people and the killed people in a statue or in a name of a space, but rather in a living element, which is the tree that would grow, that will be watered, but also many people who, as I said, their bodies have never been found. It was also the process of digging in the ground and planting the tree. Almost many of us felt as if we are burying somebody under this tree. Jabir, I'm not sure if you know the book, but for people who are working on prison, he is the co-author of this book called Syrian Gulag Inside Assad Prison System. And together with his co-author, Ongur, he wrote in the introduction that the process of mass imprisonment and torture that the Assad regime has unleashed on Syrian society has made a profound, irreversible, and indelible impact on millions of Syrians. The prison network has become a part of mainstream Syrian identity, and they add that the Gulag is omnipresent inside Syria, and its relevance reaches beyond simply the prisons and the guards. In the torture chamber, many topics come together: post-colonial state, power, authoritarianism, sectarianism, sexism, revolution, resistance, and violence. Jabir, I spoke to you about the trees. They planted so far 500 trees across Syria, and when I asked him what's the ambition, he told me he hopes to plant 1 million trees in the country. More than 1 million people have been imprisoned in the last 14 years in Syria, out of a population of 20 million, as I said, and 1 out of 2 people have been displaced. Now, in the introduction, he also cites Marchenko, who was former prisoner in the Soviet era. And he said that one thing alone gave me the strength to live through that nightmare, the hope that I would eventually come out and tell the whole world what I had seen and experienced. And Jabir and his co-author said that every single Syrian ex-detainee would have spoken to express the exact same deep desire to tell the world of what they have experienced. This is the site of the Mazda airport, which was also a detention center. And I think I just want to end with the last few slides about remembering the dead and how important for us, like, as somebody who's thinking about space and the built environment, to also document and facilitate and to understand, in space, how could the city recover? And when we speak about Ukraine's reconstruction and companies fighting to make investment and think about money and glamorous buildings and how important it is to really ground this question of tomorrow and the day after with the suffering and the pain of the people, and how important to think about the traumatic events that happened in every place. So this is in Daraya, and in Arabic, you would see a lot of male, female names, but also in some situations it's written child martyr, so also a lot of children. In the same cemetery that we visited in Daraya, one of the countryside in Damascus, we met also with the artist who painted this mural, and what's written on the text here, and I quote, "They are not only numbers." And that was so important because, as I said, that when we hear about 500,000 people killed, they are not numbers. And here in this part of the cemetery, we were told that more than 700 people were buried collectively, and nobody knows the names of them. Whereas in comparison to here, where the names have been identified. A few other photos from cemetery. And the last thing, one of the last experiences I had in Damascus, and I just want to also read a quote from Stanislav, who wrote in his article on Sednaya that of everything I witnessed in Sednaya, this was for me personally the most haunting sight. And you were referencing how people were posting the photos of their missing ones because they were going to search inside the prisons throughout the day to search for the missing persons, and printing the images of their child or husband or brother or sister, putting their names, putting the date, and asking people, have you seen this man? Have you seen this man? Have you seen this woman? Have you seen this child? And I went to this event in the National Museum in Damascus, where you see many women coming with images of their missing people, and like still fighting to continue the search for them, because many people said, like, even if we know they are killed, we want to know their fate, we want to have information, we want to know how they were killed, where were they killed, where were they imprisoned, which year. Many people still have no answers. Many people want to bury them in dignity. We had like conversation in that event at the National Museum. Even ex-detainees came, like this woman who spoke about her imprisonment inside Syria, and this entire event you can see all these families of the disappeared. It was part of a new initiative in Syria called, it's an online initiative called Syrian Prison Museum. And they documented more than 72 prisons in Syria, and they are trying to document them by interviews and by testimonies, and also by 3D scanning these torture sites to show the world and to show Syrians what happened inside the country. Because sometimes even inside the country, people wouldn't have sense of, like, what happened exactly. And this was, I think, something I would never forget, because the experience of these women was very painful. I really did not believe that I was living in a reality, because of all the stories that you would hear from these mothers and sisters and family members of the disappeared. And they were like, I'm just like looking at my notes. The organizers were saying that, oh, the government is gonna give you compensation. You're gonna have like an honor card where you would have like salaries every month. You would have income. You would have children going to school. And of course, some people have welcomed the idea, because many of these women have lost, their income from their family members. But at the same time, there were women shouting back and saying, like, I don't want money. I just want to see my beloved one more time. What would the money give me? What would that mean to me? What would the cards make me feel proud? I just want the truth of what happened to my loved person. And this was something that, the sense of exhaustion and, loss of hope. Like, even some women were saying, like, I don't want any more workshops. I don't want to be invited and tell my trauma again. I just want actions. I don't want money. Where's the human rights? But it was definitely one of the most traumatic experiences I had in Syria, because every woman was saying the story of her son. Like, one woman was saying, my son was 12 years old when he was inside Naya, and she never knew what happened to him. So I would just end here to say that, in Syria, like in many places in the world, in dictatorships, the prison is definitely, one of the most brutal experiences. But sometimes even a city or a country can become a site of fear and a site of torture that nobody would dare to ask about it disappearing, because they know also that they will disappear. Thank you so much.